for Texas Gardens. I just want to briefly say I'm here as an author and gardener. My recent book is here and published right on the grounds, homegrown here at Brit Press, part of Fort Worth Botanic Garden. But I also keep a website, Garden and Delight, and that's what I'll be sending you the link for all the herbs listing that we're talking about today afterwards, but you can find that on my website at any time. My original work came out of God's Word for Gardeners Bible, which was published in 2014. And from that book, I went to the website and became a speaker. So that's what happens when you write a book. You get to do all these things. But the books are here with me today. And but I really want to say all this is my side hustle, because this is my main job to be wife and mom. My husband and I have lived in the Irving area for ever since we were married, 35 years. But we are originally from California. Sorry. Well, I know it's not very fashionable how California's invading Texas, but we did breed 5 native Texans, so so we're forgiven, I think. Right? But that, whoops, I'm sorry, passed through that. So they are my motivation. They are the reason I go to the garden. Sometimes to escape, and sometimes to just sort out my soul, talk to the Lord, get it all right and back in perspective. So it all kind of goes together. And I like to say that because this is actually my husband, who is not a gardener. He's normal. But we did get him to pose for the cover of the book. So this is really a family book coming to you. And Layla Luna is the artist who did the renderings, and she originally worked at Brit as well. And she said, we wanted a father figure on the cover, and she's like, I need a model. And I'm like, honey, what are you doing between Zoom calls? We send them out to our backyard to pose. So that's a little hidden secret for you if you take a copy home from the book. It's coming from both of us. But I came to Brit. I was so excited because I wrote the God's Word for Gardeners Bible, which is a full devotional Bible, worked with a Bible publisher, but being thick already as a big thick Bible, it didn't have any pictures. I was like, how can you have a gardening book without pictures, Lord? So I want to do something illustrated. And if any of you remember Anne McCormick, she's a good friend and fellow author, collaborator, guide, mentor to me. And she ran this club for many years, right? She introduced me to Brit. And lo and behold, they published books there, and then I got connected with Barney Lipscomb, light of this project, just a wonderful, wonderful man to work with. He's the most wonderful, second to my husband in this world, but he has a secret passion for plants of the Bible, if you didn't know that. And so he took me under his wing, and we got to work with Layla is on his left. And then there's me, and then Becky Horn is the book designer who pulled all of this crazy ideas together. We had a lot of different illustrations we wanted to use. So we used pressed specimens. We photographed specimens from the Brit Herbarium. And then we used illustrations, as you'll see, from the library, of course, extensive botanical library there. I love the old botanical illustrations. So, and then, of course, Layla's illustrations too. So Becky's the one that brought all those together in the format that you see, and we love that. So Gary Logan also did the photography. He's a local photographer, if you've heard of him. Did the specimen photography for us, and so it's a homegrown book. So I hope you'll take it in your heart, give it to your friends. The proceeds still help benefit Brit. And today with me, special guest appearance is Carly from Brit Press. She is the one in charge of sales and fulfillment, and she also used to garden here in this very garden.
This is my garden. Oh.
She was out in the grounds before they herald her indoors.
Move me to another garden.
So it's great to have you here, Carly. Thank you for your help always. So let's dig in. Without further ado, okay, I was mulling over my mind. How do I present? How do I get this organized? I want you to come away with a real kind of handhold on what are the herbs of the Bible and spices. We'll do our, I'm sure you've heard this definition a million times, but herbs we consider, or I think of herbs, you think of herbs as the leafy, plants where we enjoy the fragrance and the taste in their leaves. And then spices are when that fragrance or taste is in the rest of the plant, either the seeds or the roots or the flowers. And so herbs and spices kind of go together. So we're going to talk about both. and sometimes some plants are both. There are 23. I count 23 from the Bible. There's probably a few fringe we could add to this list, but so how do I get your mind around these 23 plants and let you out before midnight, right? So I was thinking, okay, well, we could talk about it by plant family. We could talk about them by seed or transplant. You know, how do you? I'll just pause here and say I am coming at this as a gardener who loves herbs. So I'm really happy to be here among my people. I know there's a few non-gardeners in the, so thank you for patience with plant geekiness that we're going to have for the next time. But I come at this as a gardener who just so enthralled, right? So overwhelmed with the taste and the aroma and the scent of the herbs. It's like you're out there gardening. I gotta do something with this plant, you know. Can I bake it? Can I drink it? Can I steam it? I mean, what do I do? It's just so mesmerizing. I gotta have more of this, right? So that's where I come from as far as growing them for their beauty and then bringing them to the table to continue enjoying that flavor and aroma. I know there's a whole dimension of medicinal value. I'm not really schooled in that, and so I'm not going to speak to that. And the dosages and all that kind of stuff, I don't keep up with that. So I'm just here as a crazed gardener who loves to cook. So by seed or by transplant, how am I going to get this in my garden? Do I start it from seed, or do I need to go to the nursery or order online? Let someone else start it for me. Are they annual or perennial? You know, are they going to be in my garden year to year, or is this something I'll replant each year? Or alphabetical order? We could just start with alphabetical order. Sometimes that's easiest, but then it's not, because the plants are kind of connected in other ways. We can look at them by peak harvesting, like when do you bring them in? You know, when do you tend to these plants and bring them in and process them? And then, of course, we could just do order of appearance in the Bible. That would be another just kind of strict listing. But this is my favorite, grouped by Bible story, because really many of the herbs are in several herbs in one verse. And so if we did alphabetical, we say that verse and then come back to it later and get all confused. So we're going to go by Bible story, and I think that's the funnest. That's really the funnest. Group by story is my favorite, because this is when you really start to see, and it kind of gives you a new, like you guys know these herbs already. You've been members of the club sometimes for years and years and years. But so by studying them in God's Word, you kind of get this other level of meaning. And you get a lot hidden in the horticulture, usually where the plant is mentioned. There, if you know that plant, then you kind of know a little bit more in the story, if that makes sense. There's a literary connection there that's really fun to discover, and it helps you remember the story, and then it helps the plant be exciting to grow, and so that's why I love it. You can see that's my passion. So the gardener in me is going to lead our meandering path, and there's definitely, remember Jesus said, I'm the true vine, so some of this discussion can just go off. Sometimes it's hard to keep it organized, right? Just like it is hard to prune a vine constantly, but that's what we're going to go. So I will just give you a few overviews. Again, I want you to be able to wrap your mind around this collection of plants. So when we go by family, we're going to start with the amaryllis family with garlic, leeks, and onion. And you're like, Shelley, those aren't herbs. What are you talking about? You're starting off the bat with this. But I consider them herbs, really spices, like we were saying. These are obviously plants that we enjoy them from the roots. But the main reason that you love leeks, onion, and garlic is for their flavor. I mean, that's why you add them to everything, right? From your pot roast to garlic tea anyway. And so they are known for their flavor. And I mean, yes, they are vegetables-ish, but they're really not the heart of a vegetable dish or a meat dish. They're there for the flavor. So, and there's a good story that goes with them. So that's why we're going to add them to this list. But then here's some normal herbs. Now we're back to reality here. From the parsley family, we have coriander, cumin, dill, and fennel. And then from the sunflower family, we have chamomile, and I put in quotes bitter herbs, because as you'll see, the bitter herbs aren't technically herbs, but they are very flavorful leaves, so we're going to talk about those as well, and they have another great story. So from the mint family, we have hyssop and mint, which surprisingly, the mint family has so many herbs. Surprisingly, we just have 2 represented here today. But then from the laurel family, we have bay laurel, and did you realize cinnamon is in that family as well? And cassia is a cinnamon cousin, and so we'll talk about those. And then we have a lot of one-offs. One represented here: caper, mustard, myrtle, nigella, nettles, rue, and saffron. So that's kind of the overview. I'll do them real quick too. We can talk about how we would put them in our gardens, by seed or by transplant. So these are the ones that we would plant from seed, or easy to plant from seed, easier to plant from seed. I don't know. I like to direct sow. I don't know if any of you have greenhouses. God bless you. Or even if you have a closet that you start them indoors. Wow, hats off to you. I'm not that technical. I try to direct sow in the garden. So these are ones generally that we would start from seed. And then from transplant, in other words, from little 4-inch pots that you would get in the nursery, or some of these are more rare, so you can need to order them online. We can talk about annuals and perennials, and I'm saying all this couched in our, in our North Texas, our Texas spring gardens. These are the ones that would be annuals. In other words, we would reseed them or put them out every year. I list chamomile on here because I think in other climates maybe chamomile is perennial. The Roman chamomile is specific to the Bible, most likely. But for me, it dies out in the heat. I just can't manage that. So put that as an annual. Then biennials, of course, would grow from, you could plant them and they would last for 2 years in your garden, kind of like parsley. And then perennials, and then I put tender perennials. In other words, we would need to grow them here in pots. They wouldn't want our freeze, but. Okay, we could also look at them again from peak harvest time. When are you harvesting these things? So we're actually going to be harvesting a lot of these herbs in the spring. I was thinking, okay, February is early spring, so we can get a lot of these things in our garden right now, but I think it's going to be summer by Thursday, and it was summer this Thursday, so I think this whole idea of, Texas spring garden just totally went out the door this year, right? But a lot of these, even since we're harvesting in spring, we're fortunate enough to be able to plant them in the fall. And then if we do get a freeze, you can either cover them, or some of these are hardy enough to survive that. And then but they would really, I say spring, I'm in the spring category because they don't like the heat, so they won't last through the summer. They'll bolt before the summer. But then the summer, there are a few that will come through the summer, or at least early summer. Late fall, if you plant saffron bulbs in the summer, you would harvest them in the late fall. And then ones that would just kind of, again, sort of from the perennial, that would be able to harvest anytime. And then I put only for show. So we might grow cassia or cinnamon for fun. I don't think we'd really, it won't grow into a tree unless we have a greenhouse. And I can't say I've ever scraped the bark off a cinnamon tree to make my own cinnamon. So we're maybe more talking about for show, or just kind of for the novelty of it. And I put rue in this category too. I'll talk more about that when we get to rue. And so then, of course, by biblical order, I'll just flash these real fast. This is that kind of their order, their appearance. You can see the bulk of these is from the Old Testament, and there's a few that are specifically mentioned only in the New Testament. So we could look at them that way, but they're more intertwined than that. So let's dig in to these stories. I hope that gives your brain enough of a overarching, this is where we're going-ish perspective. So we'll dig in now. So my favorite place to start is the bitter herbs, especially for the pun of it all. I'm talking the Herb Society, and this is not really, technically, they're not herbs, right? They are, but when the Bible, or when it was translated, that they were supposed to go out and collect the bitter herbs, which I'll show the verse in just a moment in the next slide. But really that word herbs is used here in the sense of herbaceous plant. So leafy plant, not woody plant, is kind of the context there. So it's generally accepted that it would have been chicory or endive or possibly dandelion that they were told to gather in haste, right, and make this meal really quick before they were delivered that night from their slavery in Egypt. So this is the Passover dinner. And this is our first instance of where we really see the horticulture connecting, because these plants are bitter herbs for bitter tears. That's the net of it, right? That's the heart of the matter, is that they were, God heard their cries. They were enslaved for 400 years in Egypt, the Israelites, and God heard their cries, their bitter, harsh labor, and he delivered them. He prepared this magnificent, spectacular, miraculous delivery. But he did say that as you celebrate this dinner to commemorate this deliverance, always have bitter herbs in the meal to remember that yes, your situation was very bitter and troubling, but God heard your cries. He heard your cries and he delivered. And so there is that message right there in those leaves. Another little tidbit I read from one of the Israeli botanists who studies this, and he just said that bitter herbs too, they start out, the tender leaves are pretty sweet or mild tasting, but the hotter it gets, like you don't really harvest these in the summer because they get more and more bitter as time goes on, as the heat warms up. And so he said that's another illustration of the story. When the Israelites went down to Egypt, they were welcomed. They were welcomed by Pharaoh, and Joseph was in power, and so it was very sweet to start out with, but as the years went by, it got very bitter, just like these plants. So there's so many lessons like this in the horticulture that's lots of fun. So growing bitter herbs, if you don't want to grow them, they'll haunt you in your grocery store, right? So these are really, we typically think of it as a way to make a salad more fancy or more zesty, right? So endive also goes by the name escarole or frise. And it can have a smooth leaf. It can also have a very curly or curly leaf as well. And then chicory is also, it goes by the name radicchio. It also is Belgian endive, to totally confuse things. But if you take that chicory, that head of chicory, and blanch it, in other words, keep it under in the darkness, and so the color goes out, and that's how you get Belgian endive, which is a milder taste. That's why that's done that way. So those are in the grocery store as well. Dandelions, probably not sold in your grocery store, but you shouldn't have any trouble finding those. As long as they haven't been treated with any herbicides or anything. And really, the reason they are everywhere is because they started out in our salad gardens way back when, right? And so let's see that come around. So these are just fun, great ways, again, to zest up your salad. Very easy to grow. I find that the bitter herbs, or the chicory and endive, in my garden, they do much better than lettuces. They stand up a little better to the bugs, I think. Rabbits do like them though, so beware. and if we get a really hard freeze, you can plant these by seed, as I say, in the fall. And if we get a really hard freeze, you would want to cover them. But then they're also sold. You can put them in the ground right now. They're sold in nurseries as well. There's a Harry's Greenhouse out west in Weatherford. They sell them in the stores with these tags. So look for those. That's the bitter herbs. So now we're going to go on. We're going to keep that crying theme going. Watch what happens next. So now the Israelites have been delivered from slavery. They've crossed the Red Sea. Their waters were parted, and now they're out in the desert, and they're on their way to their promised land. But it's taking a little longer than they thought. They are waiting and wandering around the desert, and they get to it's very uncomfortable. This is a new lifestyle, and it's not so fun anymore. And they start to pining and remembering how wonderful and tasty everything was back in Egypt. Never mind the slavery. It was very tasty. We had good meals, and so they cry out to the Lord, and they say, we remember what we ate in Israel. We had, in Egypt, and we had leeks and onions and garlic, melons. We had the melons, so they had sweet food. They had very tasty food with the leeks, onion, and garlic, and they kind of get to crying for this. Well, and now keep in context too that this is because now they're eating manna every day. What is manna? What is it? What is manna? Well, it was this miraculous, again, food substance, bread that was rained down from heaven that God provided every morning, and all they had to do to nourish themselves every day was just to go out and collect it, right? And it was some sort of supernatural food. Some people try to assign that to a plant type. I tend to think it was a supernatural food that they gathered every day, and it perfectly nourished them, maybe the way breast milk does for babies. And so it was this perfect thing, but it was the same thing every day. Maybe they got a little bored. I don't know. They started whining and complaining. And so I just think it's kind of clever that they whine and complain. Well, God didn't like this kind of crying, right? This is murmuring, grumbling, and you're bringing the whole morale down, and you're making it not fun to go to the promised land with your attitude, right? story doesn't go so well for the complainers. But I just think this is ironic because, you know, when you chop onions, it makes you cry. So here's our little horticultural punch here to be reminded. And so I love to plant leeks, onion, and garlic. I would have never thought of this because, you know, onions, they're not that expensive. I mean, just get them at the grocery store. What's a big deal? But growing them yourself really is fun. Of course, it's a great reminder to keep your attitude in check for any situation you're in that is taking too long, right? And then, but they grow really well here. And they grow, so most of this you would plant in the fall. You can put your garlic cloves, you put them clove by clove. I mean, you've probably all grown this already, right? But you put them in the fall. You can grow, put onion seeds out in the fall, and then leek seeds as well. So garlic by the cloves, and then the two others by seed. And then if it does freeze, you know, they'll sprout up in the fall a little bit. If they have to die back through a winter freeze or what have you, that's no problem. They'll come back in the spring because they're from the bulb, and then we'll harvest them when it starts to get hot. And then if you miss that and you still have time, you could dash out to the nursery today and get onion starts from the nurseries. Usually sell them, or you can buy those online as well. And you just put the starts in the ground. I just did some of that last week. So there's still time to put your onions in. And then leeks will also stay in your garden for 2 years. Again, it's like I said earlier, biennial. And so that, which I like because, you know, usually I use leeks with soup. And that's something you're going to want to have in the fall. So even though you put the seeds in the fall, you let them grow for a year, and then you can harvest them as you're making soup when it's cold again. So that's fun. And I really think, I hope you would agree, if you grow them in your own ground, they really do have a deeper dimension of flavor. If you can say that about an onion, which is, you know, or a garlic, which is already so flavorful, but there is just a little nuance that comes from your own homegrown ground. So, and then of course you can watch over them and grow them organically and not pay that higher price. So, okay, so now we're finally going to get to an actual herb. Okay, we are greeted here by coriander, and the funny thing about coriander, as it's mentioned, is it's not even mentioned for its flavor. It's really mentioned that the manna was the color of coriander seed. So I find this very interesting, and again, my little horticultural point is that, I don't know about you, now coriander, you know, we always do this, right? Coriander equals cilantro, right? So usually we call coriander when we're talking about the seed of the plant, but cilantro when we're talking about the leaves of the plant. So we really, in our today's culture, I know we use a lot of coriander, but really we use a lot more cilantro, especially here in Tex-Mex country, right? So the leaves are very pungent. And it's sometimes for some it's a taste to get used to. I haven't always been a cilantro fan, I have to say, but I'm growing on it. But the seed itself comes from the flowers, and so it grows a very dainty flower. They're really pretty and lacy, kind of characteristic of this family of plants, the parsley family of plants. But the seed itself, it has a wonderful scent to it as you crush it. It's kind of almost lemony. It's very light and intriguing, but I find that when you actually put it in your food to taste it, I don't really taste it. I don't know if you all agree with that or not. I mean, I even put it on my cottage cheese this morning. I don't really taste it. So I find this very funny that he calls this manna. Here they are complaining about wanting more flavor, right, of the leeks, onion, and garlic, and he compares the manna to coriander seed. So was it a little bland? Was it a little mild in its taste? I don't know. I think that's our little horticultural hint here. So now I just want to pause. I think we're to the point here. Oh, whoops. Okay, wait, we're going to go one more time. One more bout here. So we've been in the desert wandering with the Israelites, talking about flavor and the bitterness and crying and all of that. Now we're going to completely fast forward to the book of Isaiah. And this is another, again, little plant list, and we'll see how it all connects. But here is where nigella and cumin are combined together. I don't know if has anyone grown nigella, or do you know which spice I'm talking about? It also goes by the name black cumin. Yeah. And so this is mentioned in this passage of Isaiah. It's a fabulous passage where Isaiah is talking about the magnificent knowledge and wonder and wisdom of the Lord. And he's comparing it to the stages and the processes of growing crops. and the difference between wheat and barley crops and spelt, I think he mentions, and then versus our herbs, and he says nigella and cumin, or else he says caraway and cumin, or else some translations say dill and fennel and cumin. And so this is where you get several different translations of what this other plant was along with cumin. Cumin has a very distinctive flavor. We all know cumin, especially here Tex-Mexers. It's very strong in Mexican food, but that's the flavor of our American chili. You might not know cumin, but you know what the chili is supposed to taste like, right? And so here we have cumin, but the other plant that's mentioned here is translated a variety of ways. So it's kind of fascinating. So I did start growing nigella. Nigella has the herb nigella is Nigella sativa, but there's also a nigella that is just a flower, love in the mist. Have you ever seen those flowers? And so they're very similar, but Nigella sativa will make seeds in their beautiful seed pods, and that's what you can use to flavor. And it also goes by the name black cumin. It probably has a few other, I think nutmeg flower, this is also called, which it doesn't even taste anything like nutmeg. So, but anyway, so also dill and fennel sometimes get translated here. So that's where we see these herbs tie in. But you can see they're all, which is it? Which is it? We just talked about manna, what is it? Now we're going to say, which is it? Is it dill? Is it nigella? Is it fennel? What do you mean, Lord? But you can see that all of them have a very similar structure and kind of that feathery leaf to them. And so you can see how the exact plant is probably hard to pin down, but in general, he's going for the parsley family type of plants that are airy and wispy in their leaves and such. And so now, has anyone here grown cumin? I find this fascinating because cumin is such a popular, very prominent spice. And it's right here from the parsley family. I mean, dill is easy to grow, coriander, cilantro is easy to grow. What is it with cumin? It's very hard to grow. Even Agnes here at Fort Worth Botanic Garden started a whole pot. That was my picture earlier. She started a pot of these plants. We get them to sprout, but it's hard to get the plants to actually grow. So I find this very ironic that in this passage that is teaching us about God's knowledge and how he knows exactly the steps of growing and scattering seed and processing and harvesting, we don't really know which plant is the first one, and then we don't really know how to grow the second one. So what is going on here, right? This is a little bit of horticultural humor, but God knows. That's the point of the passage, to trust and rely on God's knowledge and his guidance, and especially to farmers and gardeners when so much is uncertain as far as the weather and all that kind, the growing conditions and that sort of thing. That God really does know the intricacies of the earth that he created. Of course he does, but so a very clever passage here. So growing. Nigella is such a plant. I really encourage you, if you want looking for something new this year, to try nigella. They're beautiful flowers, as I say, wispy, and they make little star-shaped flowers, really pretty in the garden. The center picture is dill. Of course, one of the wonderful things about this plant family, the parsley plant family, I think, is that they're beautiful little green tufts all through the cool season, and then when they go to flower, they can get 2, 3, 4 feet tall with their pretty umbel flowers, and it's just really dramatic. It's spectacular in your garden. It's really, really fun. So that's fun. These are a few of my cumin seedlings across the years that never got too far. And then fennel, just so you probably are familiar with this, but there are 2 kinds of fennel you can grow. I love to grow the bronze fennel because the foliage is a really pretty contrast to other plants in the garden. But the bronze fennel will not make a fennel bulb. So if you like fennel bulb, like more of like a vegetable, almost like a celery bulb, which is also really good to eat, then that's a different variety of fennel than the bronze. Just so you know, I didn't know that when I planted my bronze fennel, and I was like, wait, what? How can I? Where's the bulb? So I learned that one hands on. So now we're going to also connect this passage. There's another place in the New Testament, you're probably familiar with this passage, where Jesus calls out on dill and cumin. So we have them paired again together, probably, along with mint. And Jesus calls us out. This is one of the classic herb passages, so I'm sure you're familiar with this one. Whether you read your Bible or not, this is pretty well known. But Jesus says to the Pharisees, he's reprimanding the Pharisees now because they are priestly people who stand for the Word of God, who stand for God's ways, and yet Jesus is saying, you are more concerned about the tithes than you are about love, than you are about faith and mercy. I'm a compassionate God. You're forgetting the whole thing. You're missing the whole message. You're being very nitpicky about something that's peripheral to the heart of who I am. And I just find, again, that back to the horticulture, that when you think about herbs are the flavor, right? They're the finish, they're the finesse, they're kind of an extra. But the heart of a meal is going to be your meat or your vegetables. So the herbs are there to flavor it and to really to celebrate it maybe, but they're not the nourishment. I mean, the meat is the thing, right? The vegetables are the thing. The greens are the vegetables in the salad that you're flavoring. That's the thing. And so I just find this ironic that Jesus calls out herbs. He's saying, in similar fashion, Pharisees, you're missing the true nourishment here is the love, and you're focused on this kind of peripheral thing. I mean, if we had a diet of only herbs, we would not be fully nourished. Our bodies would not be fully nourished the way they're supposed to. So I just think it's a fun play on words, and then also God talks so much about we'll get to hold on. Talks so much about being fruitful, and so again, the herbs will embellish, but the heart of it is the fruit, is the meat, is the thing. So it's showing this way. And now that there's a similar passage over in Luke. When Luke tells the story, he uses a little bit different herb list. He says mint, rue, and all other garden herbs. So that's just license to plant all the garden herbs you want, right? Right. But I just call this out because he does name rue here, so you'll see rue on biblical herbs lists. But my personal stand is I don't really see rue as an herb. I think it probably has a lot of medicinal quality. I think they've made tea with it back in the day. But you got to be careful how you handle the leaves of rue. And so I really, on my website in my plant guide, I put rue as an ornamental plant. So I think that Shakespeare, he called rue the herb of grace. And I think by him saying that, we all think, oh, rue's an herb. Kind of not really, but it's very pretty. I'm not saying don't grow it, but you have to be very careful how you handle it. And it's not, the leaves aren't like flavorful enough to put in cookies or something, right? So I put a little asterisk by rue, but I wanted to just mention that in case. Rue will grow pretty well here for us. I don't know, has anyone grown that? And does it grow successfully for you? I'm still working on that.
The caterpillars love it.
Yeah, as that word disappears, I feel like I put it out in the garden and then, I don't know, I get distracted all summer long and I come back and the plant is gone. I don't know, maybe it is the butterflies that ate it. But up north, you find it a lot in Minnesota, in the Great Lakes, and in the northern country. I think probably maybe our heat distracts it a little bit. I don't know, but anyway, that's my take on rue. So I love to just show this scene. This is over at the Dallas Arboretum, your sister garden. But again, these are pear trees. This is in the tasteful place, the edible section of the garden, and they planted fruit trees with this mint undercover, ground cover. So I know when we all plant a mint, we always had a big asterisk, put it in a pot, keep it in a pot, will take over if you leave it in the ground. So they had this special section under the fruit trees where they just let the mint go as ground cover. It's phenomenal. It's so beautiful. It's just beautiful leafy green, but it has concrete walkways on all sides of this bed, so it is contained, but it's fun to go. If you get a chance to go here, you can see a greater expanse of this herb. But I just think this is funny to see this planting, because God talks so much about be fruitful, and he talked about all the fruit trees and be fruitful, and then fruit of the Spirit is love and faithfulness. So it's kind of like a picture of this verse and what Jesus is trying to teach here. I think really fun. So now we're going to pause for a poem. Now that we've covered these umbel plants, and I have another book. I don't know when I'll ever publish it, but it's A to Z Primer of Plants from God's Word, and it just because you can see by now the plants are really mentioned in a very poetic way. They connect different passages together, and they connect different concepts, and they give you just an underlying kind of rhyme and banter to what's going on. Of course, gardeners have this odd sense of humor, so sometimes it puts a little humor back into the story, as you see. And so I just think that we miss a lot of that because we don't speak Hebrew, right? So this book is a way to connect back to that banter. So I'm just going to kind of jog your brain for a minute and read this and help you enjoy and get a better grasp and kind of a heart grasp